A couple of years ago, I was privileged to be on a team in the Diocese of Chicago, the point of which was to help congregations, tired, weepy congregations, get their rev back. We took them back to the basics. What does it mean to be church? Forget the arrangement of pews. Now, this next part here, I hadn't seen this sanctuary when I wrote this, so just bear with me. Forget about arguing about pews or the movement of the baptismal font. And I'm quite sure, given everything else I've learned a little bit about you, you're not probably fighting over right one or right two. Now, none of that stuff existed in the first or second century. And those ancestors of ours who founded the thing we call church seem to have been onto something as they bumbled their way into a community now 2,000 years old and still going. So what makes church church? Over the course of a couple of years, we led them in exercises to get at the core, for instance, of lavish hospitality. We encouraged them to challenge and chuck out the old sacred cows. We even had little miniature cows and put them on rubber bands and flung them. But the old sacred cows are, in fact, much more modern sacred cows dressed up in churchy lace. We investigated ancient practices, and we looked at the emerging church models. We examined demographics to try and figure out what the communities around each of these congregations really needed from our congregations. We dared them to get out of the building and get serious about what one of our post-communion prayers bids us do. Go out into the world that God so loves and do the work that God has given us to do. Now, I imagine that a lot of what we did with them, you did here when you all had, or some of you, and the rest of you heirs, what you did back in 1990, right? When you had the grit and the grace to start this place up with the help, I understand, of a young priest who is now Bishop of Chicago named Jeff Lee. From time to time in that program, we'd invite other people to join us, people who had experience and expertise in areas that touched upon the vitality we hoped to awaken in these people. One of the best of them was a professor in the MBA program at Northwestern University, of all things. Her subject was leadership, and we had engaged her for a full day with our participants. For the first hour or so, she led a conversation trying to get at the basic characteristics of what good leadership does. It was a lively conversation that resulted in easels filled all over the room with cool characteristics. And then she spent the next 8 hours teaching us how to dance. Now, we were as confused, including the team who invited her, about what she was about to do, but she asked us all to pair up, including the team. We thought we got to sit this out. No way. We, paired up, facing in the same direction with the follower's hand on the leader's shoulder, and all we did was walk around the room. Once we mastered that, she had us leader, follower, but the follower had his or her eyes closed. So suddenly there was furniture that didn't seem to be there before. And then we changed places. Follower became leader, leader, follower. After we figured that one out, she had us face each other and place our hands this way, like an arch, right? And we were supposed to lean in a little, each of us leaning in a little, and then we walked. And then the follower closed his or her eyes. Oh my Lord. And then she said, "You've had your first lesson in the tango." Now, part of this exercise reminded me of what many of us have done before, the old trust walk that we did with teenagers at camp or retreats. But in fact, her point was much more nuanced. A good leader knows how to follow, is in fact, and has to be first, a good follower, knows the foibles of over-anticipating the leader's moves, knows that a slight tension, this thing, between the pair is a good thing, but that too much tension tends to lead to overbalancing and collisions from which it's very difficult to recover. Now, she went on to demonstrate an interesting thing, something I didn't know before. The fact is that it's the follower who does all the fancy stuff. You can't see me. I'm trying to do fancy stuff with my feet back here. And the reason is that the follower can go out and do stuff because the follower knows that the leader is there, will be there to gather the follower back in after the fancy footwork has been done. Now, the effect of this is unbelievable for the dancing pair, but also for the people who watch and get so involved that they themselves may want to join the dance. It turns out that the professor was not only a gifted teacher, but she was also, she goes to Argentina yearly, a gifted tangoer. And she made a stunning connection. She didn't expect to do this. She thought she was learning the tango to get away from MBA stuff. This is going to be fun. But what she learned was there's a connection between the two. What she's teaching her MBA students has everything to do with what she was learning as a tangoer. And a colleague of hers who didn't know about this tango business was asked by a student, if you could describe authority in a single word, what would it be? And his answer was followability. True authority is what gives people the confidence to follow. Now, once upon a time ago, a long, long, long time ago, there was a fellow who called some strangers, many of them, interestingly, like you, fisher folk. I'll bet you haven't heard that before. "Come follow me," he said, and astonishingly, to me at least one of the Gospels reports that immediately they dropped their nets and followed him. Followability. Their new leader was, of course, a proficient follower on his own. He based his life and his actions, his stepping out into the world to do good, on the actions of the one who'd come before him, the one who'd sent him, the God who'd formed a people from a bunch of ragtag nobodies, the God who fed the hungry and nurtured the throwaways, the God who consistently guided and welcomed back strays, even the reluctant and recalcitrant ones. That's who Jesus followed, and that's the way he would lead. In their time together, Jesus led the disciples in this way of being in the world. Most of the time, as you no doubt remember, they followed stumblingly, wrong-footed and unsure. But follow they did, and little by little gained proficiency, venturing out on their own occasionally, even sometimes practiced leading. That often didn't turn out so well, but at least they practiced it until they began to get into the beat with him. In this evening's gospel, he gives his followers their last pep talk and sends them out, his followers becoming leaders, teaching new followers to be leaders in their turn. Now, I'm going to say something that you will know is not really true, but I'll say it anyway. I hate to quibble, but I will. The translation of the gospel that we just heard proclaimed is a little off. Jesus doesn't say, "Go," as if it's the most important word in the sentence. The elegant grammar of the Greek that stands behind our English translation has him assuming that they're going. Of course they're going. After all, this is the work that he's been doing for, it depends on the gospel, years or 1 year, in his time with them. He's been preparing them for this all this time. This is where all his leading and their following and their forays into practice leading have been heading. He actually says something more like, while you're on the way, while you're walking, this is what you do. You disciple. He makes a verb out of a noun. Disciple. The very first thing that he'd said in Matthew's gospel to the people when he began his ministry was, change your lives and live. Here comes the kingdom of heaven. In other words, I am here to incarnate the one whom I've been following, who sent me, and you're all invited to join me by doing what I do and saying what I say. What I want you to do is go out there and make other yous, which in the end means other me's. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, he says. And then he entrusts some of it to his followers who are about to be leaders. Now, he's not talking about the kind of authority where one person or group lords it over everybody else, as if they have all the knowledge in the world and the power, and everybody else is just stupid and inept. That's overbalancing, too much tension producing, and that way lies confusion and failure. God's dominion has always been different, always been countercultural. It's about inviting the best from people, trusting them that they have what it takes inside them to do good in the world. Maya Angelou once said that she's often amazed when perfect strangers come up to her and say, "I'm a Christian." She said she's usually tempted to ask, "Already?" Are her interlocutors disciples? Most likely they think they are. But it takes time, this process of becoming a disciple and leading others in that dance. Brian McLaren, who's no slouch when it comes to discipleship, says this: the life and death question for each of our churches and denominations may boil down to this: are we a club for the elite who pretend to have arrived, or are we a school for disciples who are still on the way? Jesus said, I think it's somewhere at the end of Matthew, I didn't call you to be sacristy rats. I never expected you to form your own chapter of the I Heart Jesus fan club. While you're on the way, he says, make disciples. Now that's the why of us. That's what church is. This evening, we're celebrating the turning of a page in Holy Family's history and in Bruce's history. You've called him to be your rector, which is to say, returning to my original metaphor, you've called him to lead you in this holy and marvelous dance. And lead you he will. He's had a lot of experience following and leading, as you know from your search documents, your interviews with him, and now your experience of the last couple of months. What you may not yet know is that he's a very we're all in this together kind of fellow. He knows that good priestcraft, good leadership, means sharing the vision, heading together gracefully, getting on with it with energy and commitment. It means cooperation. It means some leading and some following. It means that he shouldn't do it all by himself, that he doesn't know it all, that he doesn't need to know it all, and he doesn't need to act as if he does. He's got followability, as that one professor remarked. He knows that for you to continue to be a prosperous and thriving branch of the people of God in this diocese, in the world, you all have to be in the business of doing as Jesus directed, being disciples, making disciples. And he's here to help you to do just that, in part by modeling for you how that might look. Now, I've known Bruce for a long time. I told one of you 137 years, I think, something like that. Stretching back to his earliest days, or not his very earliest days, I didn't know him as a baby. Early days as a follower when he was a convivial and sometimes very confused seminarian. Through his first round of practicing leading, to his early days of rectoring, and more. I know him. You can trust him and his leadership. He's a mensch. He's a disciple, a good guy, and a dilly of a priest. You made a great choice. Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in hands not his, says the poet. That initial family of disciples gathered for what we might call Jesus' last will and testament, they began to know that in fact Christ did play in and through them. And eventually, they even acted like they believed it. They joined the dance. They invented church. They loved one another and they prayed for and served the hurting world around them. They bore the fruit, they loved the folks, and they led others to their own particular forms of discipleship. So what do you say, Holy Family? Are you ready for this next chapter, this next dance? Are you ready to bust out those doors again with your new rector to embrace this old, tired, struggling world that God so insistently, unfailingly loves? All in favor say, I will with God's help.
I will with God's help.